Hello and welcome. With the current situation in Ukraine, I wanted to revisit my trip to that interesting country which I undertook with my brother at the end of 2013. That was the time when the people of Ukraine decided to change their country for the better. Citizens started protesting and wanted to turn Ukraine in the direction of the West. That started a conflict which sadly still continues today. Even worse, after 8 years of proxy war in the eastern part of the country, Ukraine has now come under a full-scale invasion from Russia. My main reason for visiting the country was Chernobyl nuclear power plant. Since I was very young, I have been fascinated with everything nuclear, and especially with nuclear power plants which were splitting atoms to create electricity. I was really disappointed when I discovered that all of that was being used just to turn an ordinary old-fashioned steam engine. But back to Ukraine. The site of one of the worst nuclear disasters in history is located in northern part of the country. Thanks to the recent high-quality series from HBO, many more people are now informed about what happened there. It was my long-time wish to see the sarcophagus, especially after I learned that there are guided tours to visit it. It was difficult to find a company for such a trip, but in the end, my brother was interested enough to go with me. The main question was how would we get to Kiev from our hometown near Dubrovnik. In the end, we decided that the simplest solution would be to drive all the way there. It is a trip of around 2000 kilometers or around 1200 miles, and we chose my old Audi as our transportation. The trip took us over Bosnia and Herzegovina, eastern part of Croatia and most of Hungary, until we arrived at the Ukrainian border. Hungarian customs wanted us to fill out a detailed form about our car, and they were mostly interested into how much fuel we were carrying. This was because of the big difference in the prices of fuel between two countries. The form was full of technical details which we needed to fill out and was unfortunately completely in Hungarian, which was indecipherable to us. They also did not have any forms in English left either. Luckily, a policeman helped us to fill it out in the end. Ukrainian border control was more interested in our stuff and was mostly concerned if we had any drugs or weapons with us. Thinking about Ukraine, I did not know what to expect. I figured that it should be on approximately the same level as Croatia. As part of Soviet Union, they were more isolated than Yugoslavia. On the other hand, Ukraine at that point did not endure a 4-year-long war of independence as Croatia had. Crossing the border and starting the final 800 kilometers to the capital, I got under the impression that I was wrong. After seeing Soviet cars from the 80s and even sleds pulled by horses, we saw that standards here were lower than at home, at least in the countryside. As we were traveling at the start of December, we experienced one of the first snowfalls of the season and had to stop often because of the endless columns of trucks driving slowly in fresh snow. While traveling the countryside towards Kiev, we wanted to tune in to some news in English language to hear what was going on. The radio was searching and searching for some local station, but not only that we didn't hear any news in English, it didn't find any radio stations at all. It took us 30 hours without any longer stops, but we finally reached Kiev at midnight of the next day. We went to catch some rest in the hotel we had reserved. The tour to Chernobyl exclusion zone was beginning tomorrow morning from the main bus station just down the street. In the morning, we had a short walk down to the station and saw many people selling ordinary things just on the pavement next to the road. You could buy underwear, shoes, clothes, tools on your way to work. I have seen similar things earlier in Bosnia and Herzegovina and later in Beijing as well. While looking for our Chernobyl tours van, local drivers wanted to interest us in destinations to which they were driving, but when we asked if they are going to Chernobyl, they quickly left us alone. We met with our group and boarded the minibus for mixed foreign tourists. There were people from all over the world, from Kazakhstan, Canada, Poland, France, while the other minibus was completely filled only with visitors from Russia. On the hour-and-a-half drive to the Chernobyl exclusion zone, our young tour guide briefed us about the program for the day ahead of us. She worked inside the zone for a couple of years and was very knowledgeable about the subject. All of us came prepared about the topic and had all kinds of questions during the tour, but we got the answers to all of them. After stopping on a local petrol station, we watched a documentary about the incident until we arrived to the border of the zone. After the security check, we entered through the checkpoint and started the drive towards the center. On the way, they took us to visit a couple of abandoned villages along the road and also to visit the house of Hanna Zavorotnya, one of the old ladies still living alone in the exclusion zone. She is one of the people who returned after the evacuation because this was always her home and persists here despite being away from benefits of modern civilization. Our guide told us that sometimes they see her on the road walking back from the store outside of the zone and drive her part of the way. During our visit, the smoke was going out of the chimney, but Hanna was not at home. Protests in Kiev have forced the pro-Russian regime to redeploy most of the police forces from all over the country to the capital. That meant that they also pulled almost all of the police officers from the exclusion zone. For example, as we learned later, there was only one officer overseeing whole of Pripyat. What it also meant for us was that we were able to visit giant Duga radar. Duga in Ukrainian and Russian means arc and rainbow in Croatian. In Soviet Union, it was common practice to make whole cities dedicated to military projects and not to include them on official maps. One of such cities was Chernobyl too, located deep in the forest, about 10 kilometers away from the regular town of Chernobyl. The city was built to maintain radar, which was one of 3 identical installations built across Soviet Union. One here in Ukraine, one in Kazakhstan, and one on the Pacific coast. The trio of these radars were built to look for signs of incoming American ICBMs. The antenna is about 150 meters high and almost 700 meters long. Now it was no longer in use and rusts in silence. At the time, some experts feared that the collapse of Duga could shake the ground so much that the sarcophagus constructed over the remains of the reactor number 4 would also crumble. After visiting Duga, we passed the town of Chernobyl, which is actually 15 kilometers away from the Vladimir Lenin nuclear power plant. It was customary to unofficially name the project after the biggest town in the surrounding area. The town is now a hub for people maintaining the defunct reactors. Warehouses, sleeping areas and mess halls are all located here. Some of the equipment used in the cleanup operation, like robots made from Soviet Lunokhod moon rovers, are exhibited in the city center. Later, we stopped here for lunch, without any negative side effects. After leaving the town, we passed by a long stretch of water, the cooling pond of the former power plant. In the distance, you can see buildings crumbling on the horizon. The first large structures we passed were unfinished reactors number 5 and 6.
Number 5. It's really hard to believe now, but it was 75% ready when the accident happened in 1986. So if not the accident, Unit 5 will be switched on the system and it would start generating power in December 1986, just like now in December, but 27 years ago. But the accident happened and they stopped the construction. This grey building, a long grey building next to reactor number 5, is the turbine hall. So 2 turbines.
Further plans of the Soviet leadership stated that the power plant would be expanded from its original 4 to a total of 12 reactors and thus become the largest in the world. While passing next to the turbine hall over a kilometer in length, we saw sarcophagus covering the remains of reactor number 4.
You know, the very to the right, black rectangular building with white pipes. Then the twin building to the left a little bit, Unit 2. They are separate. Whereas here, what you see now, the orange crane and the ventilation stack with some supportive metal structures, that's the just between the stack, between the chimney and the crane, there is some roof, yeah, a roof with some snow. It's over there where the bio robots were working. That's Unit 3. Then there is big wall and...
Even inside our minibus, our Geiger counters started going off. They did not have the old crackling sound we know from movies and documentaries, but a constant beeping sound. Values were higher than normal but tolerable on shorter periods. Depending on the soil, climate and other factors, every country has an average radiation level which also varies from one location to another. On our trip, we even saw higher radiation levels in some parts of Kiev than in Pripyat. So, luckily, the defunct power plant is not so toxic anymore and is gradually getting safer. Still, personnel from the plant are strictly rotated every 2 weeks. Red forest separates the power plant from the infamous town of Pripyat. After the incident, radioactive material spread around the site and the trees mutated and changed color. The stretch between the NPP area and the entrance to the town is actually really short, only around 1 kilometer, and the people who lived in Pripyat often walked to their workplaces. Next to the sign welcoming us into Pripyat stands the infamous bridge where people came to watch interesting sparkles emanating from the power plant on the night of the incident. None of them knew how deadly that view actually was. The minibuses crossed the overgrown alley leading to the main square of Pripyat and stopped between the abandoned concrete buildings. City Hall is located here as well as the main hotel of the city, which was turned into a headquarters from which the containment of the fire in the reactor was coordinated. The building was especially selected because of the high roof overlooking other buildings which offered a direct view on the nuclear power plant. Our guide asked us in the name of the travel agency if we as a group would agree to pose with Ukrainian flags on the main square of Pripyat in support of protesters on the main square in the capital. They wanted to send a message that support for positive change is coming from all parts of the country. We all agreed, and this is where this picture comes from. I got to keep one of the flags, and it is still one of my most prized possessions, an Ukrainian flag which flew in Pripyat in support of the revolution. From here we continued on foot. After seeing the city's library, we entered to see the swimming pool, which became popular thanks to the legendary level of Call of Duty. After we went to see the fairground. It was built especially for the May Day celebration of 1986 and was scheduled to be opened on that day, but because of the catastrophe which happened, it was never actually used. We explored around the Ferris wheel when those of us in the group with the Geiger counters were instructed to point them to the ground. Counters, which were already beeping and showing values over the normal limit, started beeping even more, and the amounts increased several-fold. The guide explained that the soil is so much more radioactive here because this spot was the closest safe clearing to the exploded reactor. It was chosen as the landing spot for the helicopters, and here they were loading materials such as sand and boron, with which they were putting out the fire burning in the reactor. Helicopters and their crews hovered in so highly radioactive clouds that the ground on which they were landing was still so much more radioactive almost 30 years later. Stalkers is another term closely associated with Chernobyl. Some got to know it thanks to the high-quality Ukrainian-made open-world first-person shooter, and in the real world, those are enthusiasts who wish to visit the exclusion zone on their own. It is a closed community of people who have experience with traveling around the zone and cross its borders on foot and away from the eyes of the authorities. After the nuclear incident, a 30 km radius zone was implemented around the power plant. Unfortunately, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the border of the zone is not patrolled at all points, and it is possible to enter without being seen and walk to Pripyat. Stalkers are people who do that, and they explore ruins on their own and camp inside those buildings. They even leave stashes of supplies in secret locations for groups they know will come after them. They need to be careful, as the radiation is just one of the problems in the zone. It also became a haven for wildlife. It is essentially a 2,800 square kilometers area without any human interference. Many species return to this area and are thriving here. One of them being the Chernobyl wolves. When some of the stalkers wish to go home and do not want to walk all the way back out, they just walk to the authorities, who charge them a fine, which was around $10 American at the time of our visit, and escort them to the border of the zone. One of the aspects which most of the people from our group expected to see in Pripyat were untouched relics of the Soviet times. Many travel blogs and individuals claimed you could see untouched homes, books still laying on the school desks, and even moldy food which was left in a haste on a table when people fled. Those stories are not true. As we could see through the windows, everything useful was taken long ago, along with even raw materials like copper wires which were pulled from the walls. Unfortunately, Dubrovnik is also still surrounded by many buildings demolished during the war, so the sites in Pripyat reminded me of abandoned hotels in Kupari, Belvedere or military base in Prevlaka. After the military was done with the cleanup operation, the crews stored all of the highly radioactive equipment, tanks, helicopters, bulldozers, cars, on a specially designated field. It became known as the Chernobyl car graveyard. I asked if we would see it, and the guide answered that we would not. I asked again if it was because it is still so highly radioactive, and the answer was even more unpleasant. She said that we cannot see it as it is no longer there. People were sneaking into the zone and disassembling most of the equipment and sold it for scrap. Allegedly, they cleaned it with sand to remove radioactive particles, but the idea of selling still radioactive metal remained unsettling. On the way back from Pripyat, we stopped in front of the sarcophagus, about 300 meters away, at the main entrance to the compound. This is the closest civilians are allowed to come. The big concrete structure stood silently, and right next to it another structure was being constructed to eventually replace it, Novarka. All the work was going off in almost unnatural silence. I did not know that the construction site could be so quiet. We were given 15 minutes to take photos around the monument erected by former presidents of Russia and Ukraine, at the time when those were Medvedev and Yanukovych, the same president people were protesting against in the capital to the south at the time of our visit. We also learned another interesting fact, that the instantly recognizable red and white chimney seen on the top of the reactor building is not the original one. It was moved so that Novarka could be put in position. It wasn't demolished, as it became such a strong symbol of the whole place. While I stood there, surrounded with legacy and history of this unique place, I looked up, and at the top levels of the chimney there was a lone figure walking around and looking down on the whole site. He was giving an impression of a commander looking over the battlefield after a long battle. The last part of the visit to the exclusion zone was to the town of Chernobyl. We went to see the local fire station, which is still operational today. Firemen from this exact station were some of the first responders on the site of the explosion that fateful night. In front of the station stands a touching memorial monument erected and carved by the men from this station. They have built it to remember fallen comrades who came before them, and have made it full of touching details which left a bigger impression on us than the official monument in front of the actual sarcophagus. On the right are statues of firemen who rushed into the unknown fire of the reactor number 4. On the left there is a worker with Geiger counter measuring true radiation values around the building. Behind him, another worker is closing the water valve and is preventing further catastrophe. Next to him, another man has fallen ill because of the radiation, and a doctor is rushing to help him. In the middle of those people, there are two pillars with a globe, a cooling chimney from the top of the building, and a simple plaque saying, "To those who saved the world." The guide explained that it is tradition that the youngest person from every group lays the flowers which we brought with us, and in our case it was a girl from Poland. We stood there silently for a minute, grateful to the people we never met for saving the world, which we now so often take for granted.
Українці, нині влада нас зрадила. Янукович зрадив не тільки тим, що протягом 3,5 років його режим принижував нас в національному плані. Не тільки тому, що його режим позбавляв нас громадянських прав.
When we returned back to Kiev, my brother and I decided to go downtown to see the city. While waiting at the local bus station, we met a very friendly local called Alexander.
It's just begin of lager of opposition.
You think it's just beginning?
No, it's just beginning of flat headquarters. Protesters just захватили. Захватили весь центр. Absolutely. Government buildings. We are block every government's building now.
He was also going to the city center. With him, he had some food which he was bringing to his friends who were protesting there. He was more than happy to take us with him and show us around. We got first-hand explanation about the situation, how the country is at the crossroads of history because Yanukovych was ignoring the will of the people and wanted to take the country away from Europe and cement its ties and dependency with Russian Federation. We arrived on the main square, the famous Maidan, after which the whole revolution got its name. We were walking in the middle of the multi-lane street, which was usually full of traffic, but now it was blocked by barricades made by protesters. The situation was peaceful and there were no police in plain sight. All around were small vehicles and vans which were providing people with food, warmth, coffee and other refreshments. People brought them in from all over to support the protesters. Alexander took us through the barricades and showed us the Ukrainian army veterans who came to keep the peace, and indeed was peaceful, no angry mob or any violence. Close to the center of the square, a huge stage was set up and the program was going on. As we approached, Ruslana, whom we knew from the Eurovision Song Contest from a couple of years ago, was speaking to people gathered in the square and boosted their morale.
Так, я так розумію, що ви розігрілися всерйозно, так? Ну, я вам скажу, що це ще не ніч. Хоча ночі у нас тут теж гарячі, теплі, ніжні, ну такі собі трішки. Так, а як у нас на рахунок ще пострибати трішки? Хочете? Хто не скаче, то я зіру. Ти дивися, як відразу реагують. Шановні, вас знімає Європа! Світ! Ого, ви так скачете вже вище тієї йолки. Ясно. Ну, просто так скакати це не цікаво, знаєте. От, треба якось під щось. Тому в нас тут завжди готовий хлопець, висхідна зірка хіп-хопу, який співає пісню «Європа за ЄС». І це все відбувається дуже так стрімко. Отже, вітаємо Ельдар! Я вітаю! Вибач, я буквально на секунду, це серйозна справа. У мене є кошельок. Ну, не в мене його ніколи немає. А от у людей є, верніше був. Але ми готові йому його назад і дати. Він мені зовсім не підходить. Значить, шановні, насправді тут портмоне, карточка, гроші, все є. Зараз я при вас просто, щоб потім не казали, мені охорона дало, там десь є прізвище на цьому, на карточці, так? А поможіть мені його вийняти.
There is heart of revolution in this place. They don't sleep 10 days.
Alexander also showed us, as he called it, their Christmas tree, and also recommended us to try a local speciality, chicken Kiev. He found his friends whom he was looking for, and before leaving us taught us two very important words, Slava Ukraini. We soon learned that those words could come quite in handy. A group of visibly drunk men started to approach us, and we didn't know if we were in trouble. I greeted them with the bit shy Slava Ukraini, and they thunderously replied Slava Ukraini and moved on. Thank you, Alexander. Chicken Kiev was also delicious. We explored the Maidan and also learned that Kiev in December was quite a cold city, being very windy and situated on a river. but its people and Ukrainians in general were very warm hosts. Next day, we decided to take our car and go around the city to see some landmarks. It became quite challenging, but not only because Kiev is significantly larger than any city in which I have previously driven, but because many streets around the city center were closed by police or by barricades. The first landmark we visited were the old doors of Kiev, which date back to the 11th century and were one of the old gates leading into the old fortress of Kiev. After seeing the old doors, we went to visit beautiful St. Michael's Golden Domed Monastery. The site is beautiful and the domes are breathtaking, but this area was also mostly closed off because of the protesters around. Ministry of Foreign Affairs is located right next to the monastery and has become a hotspot for protesters. Some months later at home we saw the building again when it was being stormed, when peaceful protests turned into revolution. As we were leaving, there were journalists interviewing the civilian protesters. But soon a couple of buses and army trucks arrived carrying riot police. Everything remained calm, but we decided to continue our exploration of the city. Next stop was the Ukrainian State Museum of the Great Patriotic War, or how World War II is known in former Soviet Union. There we met a group of friends from Canada who were yesterday on the same trip to Chernobyl with us. Unfortunately for all of us, the museum was closed and we could only admire murals around the entrance and the giant statue of the Lady Motherland looking down on us. It must have been a big undertaking to build such a massive monument, and I hope that it will still be standing after the conflicts in Kiev stop. A friend of mine visited the museum a couple of years after our trip and said he was able to climb to the hand holding the shield and that the view was really spectacular. In the morning after, we have learned that the situation is getting more serious. We were told that some of the protesters went to the statue of Lenin, located somewhere in the city, and toppled it. This gave President Yanukovych the excuse to send more forces against the protesters. The government declared that they allowed peaceful protests, but that this was no longer it. I went to buy post stamps at the railway station located down the street from our hotel. I saw trains moving into the station and soldiers coming out of them. They lined up in front of the building and started marching towards Maidan. We didn't know what to expect next and decided to pack up and return home. Upon leaving Kiev, after only 20 kilometers or so, our car stopped. I managed to pull over on the side of the road and we saw that it wasn't something that could be easily fixed. To our astonishment, we noticed that there was a road sign for a car repair shop, GT Motors LLC, just nearby. I went to find the shop on foot and it was less than a kilometer away. I explained to the guys working there what happened, and they were kind enough to come and pick us up with an old Skoda. They towed us back to the shop and checked the car. It became obvious that the right semi-axle broke. They had ordered a replacement part from the shop nearby, but their schedule was booked for that day. Nevertheless, they said our car would be given priority. As it was lunchtime, we were told we could grab a meal in a restaurant of the hotel located just down the road. The hotel was full of old heavy tapestries and furniture we remembered seeing as kids in former socialist establishments in the 90s. This hotel surely wasn't refurbished since Soviet times. Beside the receptionist and the waitress that served us, it was completely empty. We tried to chat a bit and asked if it was low season now. To our amazement, the waitress said that the hotel, in fact, had no free rooms. We are full of police which government brought in from all over Ukraine to take care of the protests in the city center, and the same is with the all other hotels around Kiev. After the meal, we returned to the car repair shop to wait for the car. It was done in record time. They even didn't overcharge us. To this day, I'm still grateful to the guys from the shop and hope to visit them when the situation in Ukraine calms down. The rest of the trip back to Dubrovnik was long but luckily uneventful. It gave us time to reflect on interesting things we saw in those short couple of days. But we still remember the people of Ukraine the most. They were friendly, nice, and always ready to help. I need only to remember Alexander and the team in the auto shop to prove that. Most of all, we saw that people of Ukraine are persistent, in the best way. Be it Lady Hannah that still persists in the exclusion zone or protesters on Maidan, they never give up. And the current war with Russia is proving that right once again.